The sun was just peeking through the trees as Mayor Regina Thompson laced up her running shoes. She loved these quiet Sunday mornings when the whole world seemed to belong to just her and the birds. Living in the mayor's mansion hadn't changed her simple morning routine. If anything, it made these peaceful moments even more precious. She grabbed her water bottle and house keys, taking one last look in the mirror. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore her favorite gray running outfit. No fancy clothes, no mayoral badge, no security detail, just a woman starting her day like millions of others. The fresh morning air filled her lungs as she stepped outside. Henderson Park was only 2 blocks away, and Regina smiled at Mrs. Chen, who was already sweeping the sidewalk in front of her flower shop. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Regina called out, getting a cheerful wave in return. These little moments of connection were why she'd fallen in love with this city 20 years ago, long before she ever dreamed of leaving it. As she entered the park, the gravel crunching softly under her feet, Regina thought about how far both she and the city had come. She'd moved here fresh out of law school, drawn by the city's promise of growth and change. Now, at 45, she was serving as its first black female mayor. Though plenty of longtime residents still didn't recognize her by sight, especially in workout clothes on a Sunday morning. The walking path wound through ancient oak trees, their branches creating a natural canopy overhead. Regina loved watching the park come alive. Elderly couples taking their morning constitutionals, young parents pushing strollers, dogs pulling their owners along with excited energy. She'd helped secure funding to renovate the children's playground last year, and the sound of kids laughing on the new swings always made her smile. As she rounded the bend near the duck pond, Regina spotted a group of teenagers cleaning up litter, part of the youth volunteer program she'd started. They hadn't noticed her, and she liked it that way. It was rewarding to see her initiatives working without any fanfare or ceremonial ribbons to cut. Regina checked her fitness tracker. She'd done almost 2 miles already. Time had a way of flying when her mind wandered to all the projects and possibilities ahead. There was the new community center breaking ground next month, the expanding public transportation system, and her personal favorite, a scholarship program for local high school students. The morning sun was higher now, warming her shoulders as she started her cool-down walk. Other park regulars were arriving, the weekend basketball players setting up their games, families spreading blankets for picnics, and older folks claiming their favorite chess tables. This was her city at its best, peaceful, diverse, alive with possibility. She stopped to stretch near the Rose Garden, another recent addition she was proud of. The flowers were just starting to bloom, adding splashes of red and yellow to the morning scene. Regina took a long drink from her water bottle, planning the rest of her Sunday in her head. There was that stack of budget reports to review, but maybe she'd treat herself to brunch first at that new cafe on Oak Street. Little did she know, this ordinary Sunday morning was about to become anything but ordinary. As she adjusted her ponytail and prepared for the walk home, a police cruiser pulled into the park's entrance. In those next few moments, everything she thought she knew about her city, and everything her city thought it knew about itself, was about to be tested. Regina watched the police car drive slowly along the park's main road. As mayor, she'd increased the police presence in parks to make families feel safer, but something about this officer's approach seemed different. She couldn't have known then that this moment would soon make headlines across the country, sparking conversations that would change not just her city, but communities everywhere. She took one last look at the peaceful scene around her, the kids on the playground, the chess players deep in thought, the roses catching the morning light. In minutes, this tranquil Sunday morning would transform into something none of them could have expected, least of all the mayor herself. Officer James Barrett had been having a rough morning. His coffee maker broke, his teenager was giving him attitude, and now dispatch had sent him to check out a suspicious person call at Henderson Park. He'd been on the force for 6 years, and these types of calls usually turned out to be nothing, just someone's prejudices getting the better of them. The caller had reported a woman in athletic wear walking around the park multiple times, looking at different areas. Barrett almost laughed at how ordinary that sounded, but protocol was protocol. He drove slowly through the park entrance, scanning the walking paths for anyone matching the description. That's when he spotted her. A black woman in gray workout clothes, standing near the Rose Garden, She was taking a drink from her water bottle, nothing suspicious about it, but something in Barrett's tired mind clicked wrong. Maybe it was the way she was studying the area, or perhaps it was just his bad morning, looking for somewhere to land. He pulled the cruiser to a stop and stepped out, leaving the engine running. The morning sun glinted off his badge as he approached, his hand resting casually near his belt, a habit born of training and years on patrol. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying that authoritative tone police officers learn early in their careers. Regina turned, water bottle still in hand, and offered a friendly smile. "Good morning, officer. Is everything all right?" She noticed his stance, slightly aggressive, and felt her mayoral instincts kick in. How many times had she sat through community meetings discussing exactly this type of interaction? "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," Barrett said, taking another step closer. "Mind telling me what you're doing here?" His tone had an edge to it that made several nearby parkers stop and watch. "I'm just finishing my morning walk," Regina replied calmly, years of public service helping her keep her voice steady. "I do this every Sunday. I live just a few blocks away." She gestured toward her neighborhood, but Barrett's expression hardened. "I'm going to need to see some ID," he demanded, moving closer still. The morning air suddenly felt thicker, heavier with tension. A young couple walking their dog stopped to watch, the woman already pulling out her phone. Regina took a deep breath. "Officer, I don't have ID with me. I'm in my workout clothes. But if you'll allow me to make a call, I can have my office verify my identity. You see, I'm actually the May." "No phone calls," Barrett cut her off, his voice rising. "Ma'am, when someone refuses to identify themselves, that's a red flag. Put your hands where I can see them." The absurdity of the situation might have been funny if it weren't so serious. More people were gathering now. An older man who recognized the mayor from his granddaughter's school dedication ceremony started to approach, but Regina caught his eye and subtly shook her head. She knew how quickly these situations could escalate. "Officer Barrett," she said, reading his nameplate, "I understand you're doing your job, but this is a misunderstanding. I'm Regina Thompson, and I'm the mayor of this city. If you'll just contact dispatch or your supervisor." "Right, and I'm the governor," Barrett scoffed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back. You're being detained until we can verify your identity." The sound of phones recording was now unmistakable as more residents gathered at a safe distance. Regina felt her heart racing, but her voice remained steady. "Officer, I want to comply, but I need you to understand that this is an illegal detention. You have no probable cause, and I'm telling you again, I am the mayor of this city. Please, radio this into your supervisor." But Barrett had reached that point of no return that sometimes happens when authority meets resistance, even peaceful resistance. His pride and morning frustrations had backed him into a corner of his own making. He reached for his handcuffs, the metal catching the sunlight. The growing crowd murmured in disbelief. Someone shouted, "That's Mayor Thompson," but Barrett was too far gone in his own misconception to hear it. The next few moments would be captured on dozens of phones, shared thousands of times, and spark a national conversation about power, prejudice, and the sometimes razor-thin line between keeping the peace and disturbing it. Regina looked at the faces around her, worried parents quickly ushering their children away, young people with phones raised, elderly couples shaking their heads in dismay. In her mind, she was already thinking about how to turn this moment into something meaningful, how to make sure this didn't tear her city apart, but instead brought it together. But first, she had to get through the next few minutes with dignity intact and everyone safe. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked around Regina's wrists, the sound somehow louder than the growing murmurs of the crowd. The morning that had started so peacefully was now spiraling into something that would be replayed on news channels across the country. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Barrett began, reciting the Miranda rights with mechanical precision. Regina noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Perhaps some part of him was beginning to realize the magnitude of his mistake. The water bottle she'd been holding rolled away across the park path, forgotten. A gentle breeze carried the scent of the nearby roses, the same roses she helped plant during last spring's community garden initiative. The irony wasn't lost on her. Few people knew she'd insisted on roses despite her allergies, believing their beauty would bring more joy to the park than any personal discomfort they might cause her. Now she stood handcuffed beside them, still choosing the greater good over personal comfort. "This is outrageous," called out Mrs. Chen, who had followed the commotion from her flower shop. "That's our mayor." More voices joined in, a chorus of protest and disbelief. Regina could see the confusion flickering across Officer Barrett's face, but like many people who've made a serious error in judgment, he seemed determined to see it through rather than admit his mistake. "Everyone stay back," Barrett commanded, his voice carrying less authority now. He reached for Regina's arm to guide her toward the police cruiser, but his usual confidence had cracked. The mayor could feel the tremor in his grip. Regina straightened her spine, years of public service having taught her that how you carry yourself in a crisis matters as much as what you say. "Officer Barrett," she said quietly, for his ears only, "I want you to know that whatever happens next, this can be a moment of learning, not just punishment." The young couple who'd been walking their dog had moved closer, their phones steady as they recorded. The golden retriever whined, picking up on the tension in the air. A small child pointed and asked, "Why are they arresting the nice lady who gave a speech at my school?" Regina's heart ached at the question. How many children were watching this? What lesson would they take from it? As she was led toward the police car, she noticed a group of teenagers, the same ones she'd seen picking up litter earlier, huddled together, their faces a mix of anger and fear. "Call my office," she called out to the crowd, her voice clear and steady. "And please, everyone stay calm. We'll sort this out properly." Even now, she was thinking of her city, knowing that how people reacted to this incident would shape community relations for years to come. Officer Barrett opened the back door of his cruiser, the familiar routine of his job now feeling strangely foreign. The growing crowd had formed a loose circle around them, phones recording from every angle. Someone was already live streaming the incident, the mayor's words being broadcast in real time. As Regina was about to be placed in the car, a police radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, be advised, we're receiving multiple calls about your current situation. Please verify the identity of your suspect. Repeat, verify identity immediately." But Barrett, too far committed to his mistake, reached for the radio with his free hand. "Transport to station for identity verification," he responded, avoiding the direct order. The radio crackled again with what sounded like the beginning of an urgent response, but he quickly turned down the volume. Regina allowed herself to be guided into the back seat, maintaining her dignity even as her workout clothes caught awkwardly on the plastic covering. She'd sat in the back of police cars before, but always as part of community outreach programs, never like this. The interior smelled of pine air freshener and institutional cleaning products. Through the window, she could see people running toward the scene, park maintenance workers who knew her from monthly planning meetings, parents who recognized her from school events, regulars from the weekend farmers market she'd helped establish. Their faces showed shock, anger, and disbelief. As Officer Barrett closed the door, Regina caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She saw not just herself, but every person who'd ever faced prejudice wrapped in the false security of protocol. She took a deep breath, knowing that what happened next would matter not just for her, but for her entire community. The cruiser's engine hummed to life, and as they pulled away from the Rose Garden, Regina could see people already on their phones, some calling her office, others sharing the video that would soon go viral. In the front seat, Officer Barrett's shoulders were tense, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The brief drive to the station would change both their lives forever, but only one of them knew it yet. The 5-minute drive to the police station felt like an hour. Regina watched her city pass by through the cruiser's window, the same streets she'd walked countless times during her campaign. Outside a coffee shop, people stopped and pointed as the police car passed, already recognizing their mayor in the back seat. Officer Barrett pulled into the station's parking lot, carefully avoiding eye contact with his passenger through the rearview mirror. The morning shift was changing, and several officers milled around outside the building. One of them, Officer Chen, nearly dropped his coffee cup when he saw who was sitting in the back of Barrett's cruiser. "I need to process a suspect for identification," Barrett announced as he opened the car door, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The tremor in his voice betrayed his growing uncertainty. Something about the way his fellow officers were looking at him made his stomach tighten. The desk sergeant, a 30-year veteran named Richardson, looked up from his computer as Barrett led Regina through the station doors. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed in disbelief. "Oh no," he muttered, standing up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Oh no, no, no." "Officer Barrett," Regina said calmly, still in handcuffs, "I believe the sergeant recognizes me. Perhaps now would be a good time to make that phone call to my office." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as a heavy silence fell over the station's front desk area. Sergeant Richardson rushed forward, keys already in hand. "Mayor Thompson." This is Officer Barrett. Remove those cuffs immediately." His face had turned an alarming shade of red as he fumbled with his phone. "I need to call the chief. Right now." Barrett stood frozen, the reality of his situation finally crashing down around him. His hand moved to the handcuff keys at his belt, but his fingers felt numb. "Mayor Thompson," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The color drained from his face as smartphone notifications began pinging throughout the station. The video from the park was already spreading. "Yes, Officer Barrett," Regina replied, maintaining her composure even as other officers and staff members gathered in doorways and corridors, watching the scene unfold. "As I tried to explain at the park. Now, would you please remove these handcuffs? They're starting to get uncomfortable." The clicking of dress shoes on tile announced the arrival of Captain Rivera, who had been in his office reviewing weekend reports. He took in the scene before him. The mayor in handcuffs, Barrett's ashen face, the gathering crowd of officers, and immediately grasped the severity of the situation. "Get those cuffs off her right now," he ordered, his quiet voice carrying more authority than any shout. Barrett fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly that Sergeant Richardson had to step in and help. The handcuffs finally fell away, leaving faint red marks on Regina's wrists. "Mayor Thompson," Captain Rivera said, stepping forward. "I cannot begin to express." This is, for once, the usually eloquent captain found himself at a loss for words. Behind him, phones continued to buzz with notifications as the story spread across social media like wildfire. Regina rubbed her wrists gently, looking around at the faces of the officers she'd worked with over the past 2 years, faces that now showed a mix of shame, shock, and embarrassment. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent station, "I believe we need to have a department-wide conversation about what happened today. But first, I'd like to use your phone to call my office. I imagine my staff is rather worried by now." A young officer rushed forward with the phone, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. Through the station's windows, Regina could see news vans already beginning to arrive, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like metal flowers seeking sun. Officer Barrett had backed up against the wall, his face a mask of horror as the full implications of his actions began to sink in. His career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for, it all hung by a thread. But when he finally found the courage to look directly at the mayor, he saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not anger or vengeance, but a calm determination that somehow frightened him even more. "Officer Barrett," Regina said, turning to face him fully. The entire station held its breath. "I want you to sit in on the call I'm about to make to my office. I think it's important for you to understand exactly how we're going to handle this situation." She paused, looking around the room. "How we're all going to handle this situation." Captain Rivera quickly ushered them toward his office, past the wide-eyed stares of fellow officers and staff. Outside, the number of news vans was growing, and phones throughout the building continued their endless chorus of notifications. The story was exploding across social media platforms, but its real impact was just beginning to unfold in this room, where a mayor's response to injustice would soon set an example for the entire nation. By noon, the story had exploded. News helicopters circled above City Hall like hungry birds, while reporters crowded the steps below. Regina sat in her office, still in her gray workout clothes, watching the scene unfold on multiple TV screens. Her press secretary, Linda, was fielding calls from national networks, all demanding statements and interviews. CNN is on line 1, MSNBC on line 2, and Fox News has called 6 times in the last hour, Linda reported, her usually neat desk now buried under sticky notes and message slips. "And the police union president wants to meet immediately." Regina took a sip from her water bottle. A new one her assistant had rushed to get her and studied the muted TV screens. Each showed the same cell phone footage from different angles, her arrest in the park now playing on an endless loop across America. Mayor Thompson, her chief of staff, called from the doorway, tablet in hand. Social media is going crazy. The video has over 2 million views already. People are organizing a protest for this evening. He paused, scrolling through his tablet. And support is pouring in from other mayors across the country. Outside her window, Regina could see more people gathering. Signs were already appearing: "Justice for Mayor Thompson" and "End police bias now." The crowd was growing, but remained peaceful, exactly what she'd hoped for when she'd made that calm plea in the park. Her phone buzzed with a text from her teenage daughter. "Mom, are you okay? My friends keep sharing the video. Do you need me to come home?" Regina's heart ached. She'd raised her children to believe in justice and dignity, and now they were watching their mother live through exactly the kind of incident she'd warned them about. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. The police chief entered, looking like he'd aged 10 years since morning. "Mayor Thompson," he began, his voice heavy with concern, "I've placed Officer Barrett on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The union's not happy, but given the circumstances." Regina held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Chief, please sit down. We need to think bigger than just one officer." She stood and walked to the window, watching more people join the crowd below. "This isn't about punishing Barrett. This is about fixing a system that made him think his actions were acceptable." Her phone buzzed again. This time a message from Mrs. Chen. "The community wants to help. We're organizing a town hall meeting. Just say when and where." Regina smiled, remembering how the flower shop owner had tried to stand up for her in the park. The police chief shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "The thing is, Mayor, the union is worried about precedent. They're concerned about officers being afraid to do their jobs." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Though I want you to know, most of our officers are horrified by what happened." Regina turned back from the window, her expression thoughtful. "Tell me, Chief, how many complaints about racial profiling has your department received in the last year?" The chief's uncomfortable silence was answer enough. "And how many of those complaints resulted in any meaningful change?" A commotion in the outer office drew their attention. Through the glass walls, they could see Officer Barrett had arrived, still in uniform but without his badge. His face showed the strain of a man who knew his career hung by a thread. "He's not supposed to be here." The chief started to rise, but Regina waved him back down. "Actually, this is perfect timing," she said, pressing the intercom. "Linda, please send Officer Barrett in, and get me the community relations team and the police training coordinator. We're going to need everyone for what comes next." Barrett entered the office like a man walking to his own funeral. "Mayor Thompson," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know nothing I can say will make this right, but—" "You're correct, Officer Barrett," Regina interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Nothing you can say will make this right, but what you can do might." She gestured to an empty chair. "Sit down. We're about to have a very important conversation about the future of this city's police force." The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes in the air as Regina took her seat behind the desk. On the TV screens behind her, the protests were growing larger but remained peaceful. Signs of support were now mixed with calls for change, exactly the combination she needed. "Here's what we're going to do," she began, looking at both men. "We're going to turn this moment into a movement. Not just a suspension, not just sensitivity training, but real, lasting change." She picked up her phone, showing them Mrs. Chen's message. "The community wants to be part of the solution. Let's give them that chance." As Regina outlined her plan, more staff members filed into the office. Outside, the chants from the crowd grew louder, but instead of calling for punishment, they were now calling for reform. The mayor's calm response to her own mistreatment had set a tone that was spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. The story was far from over, but its direction was shifting. What had started as a crisis was transforming into an opportunity, not just for their city, but for communities across the nation watching this story unfold. And at the center of it all sat Regina Thompson, still in her workout clothes, ready to show the world how justice and wisdom could work hand in hand. The community center buzzed with energy as people filled every seat in the large meeting hall. It had been 3 days since the arrest, and Mayor Regina Thompson stood at the podium, still wearing her signature pearl necklace, a gift from her grandmother who'd taught her that grace under pressure was a superpower. "We're not here to point fingers," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. "We're here to join hands." The crowd, a mix of citizens, police officers, and community leaders, sat in tense silence. Officer Barrett sat in the front row, out of uniform, his face showing the weight of the past few days. Behind the mayor, a large screen displayed the new initiatives she was proposing. The local news crew's cameras rolled as she outlined her plan, dubbed Project Bridge, a comprehensive reform package that would transform how the police department interacted with the community. First, Regina announced, pointing to the screen, "We're implementing mandatory monthly community engagement days. Officers will spend time in local neighborhoods, not as law enforcement, but as neighbors." She glanced at Barrett, who nodded slowly, understanding washing over his face. Mrs. Chen stood up from her seat, raising her hand. "Will these officers visit our shops? Our community centers? Really get to know us?" The question carried the weight of years of distance between law enforcement and the community they served. "Exactly," Regina smiled. "Officer Barrett has actually volunteered to lead this initiative." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Barrett straightened in his chair, his shoulders squaring with newfound purpose. The mayor had met with him privately the day before, and their conversation had sparked an unexpected transformation. Second, Regina continued, "We're establishing a civilian oversight committee with real power to review police practices." She gestured to a diverse group of community leaders seated near the podium. "These volunteers represent every neighborhood in our city. They'll work directly with the police department to ensure fair treatment for everyone." The police chief shifted in his seat but remained supportive. Their private meetings over the past few days had been intense but productive. He'd come to understand that this wasn't about weakening the police, it was about strengthening the community. A teenage girl raised her hand next. "Mayor Thompson, will you tell us what went through your mind when you were arrested? Were you scared?" The room fell silent, waiting for the answer. It was the question everyone had wanted to ask, but hadn't dared to. Regina paused, touching her grandmother's pearls. "I was scared," she admitted, her honesty filling the room. "But not for myself. I was scared for our community, for what this incident could do to us if we let it divide us. That's why I'm proud to announce our third initiative, the Youth Police Partnership Program." The screen behind her showed images of young people and police officers working together on community projects. "We're creating opportunities for our youth to work alongside officers in community service, sports programs, and educational initiatives. When people know each other as human beings, it becomes harder to act on prejudice." Officer Barrett raised his hand, speaking publicly for the first time since the incident. "Mayor Thompson," his voice cracked slightly, "I'd like to volunteer to coach in the youth basketball program." The room held its breath, watching this moment of vulnerability from the man who'd been at the center of the storm. Regina's face softened. "Thank you, Officer Barrett. That's exactly the kind of involvement we need." She turned back to the crowd. "This isn't just about new policies, it's about new relationships. Real change happens heart by heart, person by person." A local pastor stood up, his deep voice carrying across the room. "Mayor Thompson, you had every right to be angry, to demand punishment. Why choose this path instead?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Regina stepped out from behind the podium, moving closer to the audience. "Because punishment alone doesn't heal. It doesn't build. It doesn't unite." She looked around the room, meeting eyes of different colors, faces of different ages. "What happened to me in that park happens to people every day. The only difference is I have the power to do something about it. We all do." The meeting continued late into the evening, with community members offering suggestions and volunteers signing up for various programs. Officer Barrett stayed afterward, talking with teenagers about the basketball program, his face showing the first real smile since that Sunday morning. As Regina gathered her papers, she noticed Mrs. Chen approaching with a small potted rose bush. "For your office," the flower shop owner said with a warm smile. to remind us that beautiful things can grow from difficult moments. Looking around the room at the small groups still deep in conversation, officers chatting with community members, teenagers signing up for programs, elderly residents sharing stories with young cops, Regina felt a surge of hope. The incident in the park had created an opening, and her city was walking through it together towards something better. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. "Mom, my friends want to volunteer for the youth program." "You're trending again, but this time it's all about #ProjectBridge. Regina smiled, knowing that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes, if you're brave enough to build bridges instead of walls. 6 months had passed since that Sunday morning in Henderson Park. The roses were blooming again, but this time they surrounded a new sign that read Unity Park, a name chosen by the community itself. Mayor Regina Thompson stood near the spot where she'd been handcuffed, watching kids play basketball with police officers on the newly renovated courts. "Looking good out there, Coach Barrett," she called out. The former patrol officer, now head of community youth programs, gave her a warm wave as he demonstrated a proper shooting technique to a young player. His police uniform had been replaced by a coaching whistle and a T-shirt with "Bridge Builders" printed across the back. The park had become a symbol of transformation. Where there had once been tension, there was now connection. The basketball courts hosted weekly games between police officers and community members. The Rose Garden, now twice its original size, was tended by a mix of volunteers, including several officers who came by during their breaks. Mrs. Chen approached, carrying 2 cups of tea from her shop across the street. 6 months, she said, handing 1 cup to Regina. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that all this started with such an ugly moment." Her flower shop had become an unofficial meeting spot for the Civilian Oversight Committee, its back room often filled with the smell of fresh flowers and the sound of productive discussion. Regina sipped her tea, watching a group of elderly residents teaching young officers how to play chess at the park's concrete tables. "Not started," she corrected gently, revealed. "The problems were already here. We just needed a catalyst to face them." A news van pulled up nearby. They still came regularly to cover the city's transformation. Project Bridge had caught national attention, with police departments across the country sending representatives to learn from their example. Regina had been invited to speak at police academies and city councils, sharing how a moment of crisis had become an opportunity for change. Her phone buzzed with a message from the police chief. "Monthly stats are in. Civilian complaints down 60%. Community engagement up 200%. You were right." She smiled, remembering their heated debates in the early days of the reforms. Now he was one of their strongest advocates. A group of teenagers walked by, wearing the bright blue shirts of the Youth Police Partnership Program. They were heading to the community center, where former troublemakers now worked alongside officers to mentor younger kids. One of them was the same young man who'd recorded her arrest on his phone. Now he was leading peer mediation sessions. Mayor Thompson called a familiar voice. Officer Rodriguez, one of Barrett's former partners, jogged over. "We just got approved for the expansion of the school outreach program. 5 more schools want to participate." His face showed the enthusiasm that had become common among officers who'd embraced the changes. Regina nodded approvingly. The program, which paired officers with schools for regular informal visits and mentoring, had shown remarkable results. Teachers reported better relationships between students and law enforcement, and officers spoke of feeling more connected to the communities they served. Near the playground, she spotted Barrett deep in conversation with a rookie officer, probably sharing his story, something he'd become known for in the department. His journey from that morning's mistake to becoming a champion of community policing had inspired others to examine their own biases and commit to change. "Mom," Regina turned to see her daughter approaching with a group of friends. They were carrying supplies for the afternoon's community art project, another Bridge Builders initiative that brought people together to create murals promoting unity. "We've got everyone coming today, grandparents, kids, officers, everyone." The mayor watched as people began gathering for the art project. There was Officer Chen, who'd been at the station that fateful morning, now laughing with a group of elementary school students. The police union president, who'd initially resisted the reforms, was helping set up easels. Even some of the reporters who'd covered the original incident had put down their cameras to join in. Regina felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find Barrett standing there, a basketball tucked under his arm. "Hard to believe it's been 6 months," he said, his face showing both regret and hope. "You know, I almost quit that day. But you showed me there was another way." "We all had to find another way," Regina replied, watching more families arrive for the afternoon activities. "That's what community means, growing together, even from our mistakes. Especially from our mistakes." A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses across the park, now mixed with the smell of paint from the art project and grilled hot dogs from the community cookout that had become a weekly tradition. The sun caught the new park sign, making the words Unity Park gleam. Regina's phone buzzed one last time, a message from her chief of staff. "National Police Reform Committee wants you to keynote their conference. They're calling Project Bridge a blueprint for national change." She smiled, pocketing the phone and picking up a paintbrush instead. "Ready to help with this mural, Officer Barrett?" she asked. They walked together toward the gathering crowd, no longer a mayor and the officer who'd arrested her, but two people among many, building something new from the pieces of what had been broken. Above them, the late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of hope, while below, in a park that had witnessed both injustice and healing, a community continued to grow stronger together, one bridge at a time.